All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our presentation on the Resume Lab. This is a presentation where we'll talk about lots of things when it comes to resumes. We'll have some interaction where you'll be able to ask questions toward the end of the presentation. If you have something burning that comes up on a particular slide, feel free to ask that. We'll stop and we'll attend to your question, and then we'll carry on through that. So, excellent. All right. So if you need to get up and walk around, or if there's anything you need, a drink of water, if you're at work and you're called away, whatever the case may be, please do so. Take care of yourself during this time of what your needs are. As I said earlier, this is being recorded, so everyone will get a copy of this within the next day or two. Um, and if you want to contact us later for any questions or after a presentation thoughts or considerations, you can email us at careers@wgu.edu, and we will be glad to attend to your questions or statement after the presentation. So what we're going to do today, we're going to go over some things that are very pertinent to today's resumes. The applicant tracking systems. We'll walk through a sample resume just to have a visual of what we look at. We'll cover some do's and don'ts. Some of these may be perfectly, standard, redundant things that you might have heard of before. But we'll look at some of the top ones just as a reminder of remember to do this on a resume, do not do that on a resume. And if you have questions on why, either way, I'd be glad to answer those questions as well. Job descriptions are really important, and they're important for two reasons, or let me say, they're important for two purposes. The first purpose is it's the only way you're going to know what the employer wants to see on your resume. Uh, do not write a resume blind. What I mean by that is don't just write an old just a resume without knowing who your audience is. Where is it going to? Now, you may start writing a resume and say, "Well, I've got a model. I've already written, or I've already had a resume, but now I'm changing careers, or now I'm changing or pivoting in some way." That's perfectly fine, but you don't want to send the same old resume out over and over and over again. So the job description is your best friend in this situation. It's going to tell you exactly what the employers are looking for. The other purpose of a job description, and we can't get into it with this presentation, but a job description is also a really great tool to use to prepare for interviews. Because again, that job description is in place to outline what the employer is looking for. So if that can be used as interview preparation, that's a great way to use those job descriptions as well. And then at the end of our time, we'll open up for some more Q&A and to see if you have any further questions based on what we covered today. Now, I'm going to stop here because there's a little bonus that's going to be happening. We are implementing what's called drop-ins. Our drop-in sessions are just open time where you can come online and you find it through Handshake, and you can ask questions. That's all we're going to do. We're not going to have a presentation. We're not going to have an agenda. We're not going to have slides. We're not going to have a recording. It's just going to be open forum. If your question does not get answered here with this presentation, tomorrow at 1:30 Central Time, we are doing a drop-in all things resume. So if you ask a question or two, but we can't go into more detail, then perhaps tomorrow is a good place to carry on the conversation, and we'll keep talking about all things resume. Tomorrow afternoon, 1:30 Central Time. You can find this in Handshake and register for the event, and we'll keep on talking. So in this case, let's talk about applicant tracking systems. Pardon me. Applicant tracking systems are used by most employers today. These are probably very quickly turning into AI driven scans of your resume, those artificial intelligent uh, ways of folks being able to scan your resume to see if it fits the job description, for example. So they're also used for other ways. Applicant tracking systems are also used to create a file just for you. So Brianna, Cindy, David, Florentina, you'll have like it'll pick up your name, your contact information, and put you in. It's a tracking system for applicants. It'll also scan for those keywords of your resume to see if you're qualified, if you fit the bill. If you don't, that's typically why folks will say, I've sent out lots of resumes, but I get no responses. Or I get what seems to be a canned rejection letter. It's probably an applicant tracking system, for whatever reason, determines that your resume is not making the cut. So that could be one of the issues that happens. How do you survive that? How do we get through these applicant tracking systems when we're applying to jobs? Well, there are two critical things to keep in mind. One is make sure your resume is your own work. Don't use a template. I know a lot of people do, and maybe some of you are gasping saying, oh, oh my God, I used a template. One of the reasons is, and if you can see this at all, some templates will have big sections of color where inside of it they'll have your contact information, they'll have your education, you'll all have content into this big dark band, and then the rest of it will be splattered with a section here in the corner. I'll put your work history over here. These are created by desktop publishers, and that's perfectly fine, but they're probably not resume writers. They're probably not employers or recruiters or hiring managers saying, we don't want your picture on a resume. We don't want this group of wording in this dark band to the far left of your resume. There is an order of where things go and a format of how it's all arranged. So if the applicant tracking system can't read it because of these things that's there, then it might be able to kick it out. Now, one quick question that just popped up: what about ATS friendly templates? If it's marketed or branded as ATS friendly, then that's perfectly fine. We're going to go through some of the things that will help verify what that means, with what ATS friendly would basically mean for that. But the other critical thing is, again, you want to make sure you're using those job descriptions to identify specific keywords for your resume that's in and kind of peppered throughout the document. Don't write a resume that simply highlights your past. You want a resume that's balanced, that may have some information, obviously, about your past work history. Of course, that's going to be past oriented, but you're writing for your next step forward. So that's why you want to find the job descriptions first, have an idea of the company and where you want to work, not just a generic resume, but something that is directed to a specific targeted position in company. It's going to be your best bet. Because resumes with that low match rate will not be reviewed by a recruiter, or if they are reviewed by a living person, a recruiter, but they can't follow it clearly or understand that you're writing for this particular job, they may put it aside. They may just dismiss it for somebody who has a better, stronger document. Now, when we're talking about templates, Jalen, as you mentioned, and formatting, you want to be sure that whatever you're using, that they are not having a lot of over stylized elements on the document. Like I said, big big bands of color. Everything is, in all caps. And I've seen that before. There's a resume template floating out there like that, that everything is in big capital letters, bolded, your name. That's like 24 point size, uh, things like that. Pictures like icons, that little icons for your phone, your email, LinkedIn, things, all those kinds of things. I would lean more to being much more conservative in choosing what you're going to use for your resume. Now, on our resume page at the Career Center, we do have samples that align to our degree programs. So if you're in IT, if you're in cybersecurity, for example, within IT or just a general IT resume, we have a sample that you can look at. Business, accounting, marketing, nursing, healthcare, project management, all of those things that you can find. If you don't find it there, then you find something to use when you're ready for that resume review. That's where we might come back to say, here's a good sample, do this, do that, avoid these things. That's later down the road. PDFs are usually not a good choice because most applicant tracking systems, until they evolve and until we hear anything differently, I haven't yet, but those applicant tracking systems cannot usually read with inside a PDF, as well as text boxes, things like that. Columns, sometimes certain columns can mess them up, so you want to be careful with that. Again, we shy away from colors, from tables, things of that sort. So just be careful of that. The best bet is a clean Word document. That is a text-based Word document is best. And you can be assured that through those ATS scans, and also when it gets to a recruiter, you want to make sure the recruiter is not frustrated by trying to weed through big columns and colors and boxes and images and things like that. Just think about a recruiter that's looking at, resume after resume after resume. Your eyes get tired, you're fatigued from the day. You want to make it as easy as possible to help them see what you want them to see on that document. So speaking of recruiters, when a recruiter reads your resume, it's usually really no more than 7 seconds, if that long. And one study shows that more than 80% of recruiters spend their time on looking at your name, looking at, skimming the document and highlighting where did you work, what dates, or the dates all in order, that sort of thing. Then they may go back up to look at your summary qualifications. And they also might look at your education, of course, so that's a qualifying factor. So all these things, they may be bouncing around on your resume. So you want to be really careful to make sure that it's as easy as possible to find that information. So you don't want to make it too wordy. You don't want to make it too cluttered, things like that. Yes. So Jalen, a .doc or .x is probably, I think, the most recent Word document for a PDF, or better than a PDF, because the PDFs cannot always get through. Plus, if you're looking at the job description, look at the instructions on how to apply. If they say they want a Word document, send the Word document. If they mention a PDF is okay, then a PDF is okay. But in general, if you're not sure, you're just preparing this for your job search, I would start with just a Word document for that. So here is an example of a resume. And I'm going to give you my own take on this as well. This is what was prepared from our team on the presentation. So I'll also give you my opinion on some things that I know about when it comes to resume writing. The first is going to be at the very top of the resume with your name. I recommend do not use all caps for your name. Have it in mixed case, as they call it, just so that it reads easier. And if you have a name that is more than just Joe Smith, then you want to have it in mixed case, not all uppercase. Contact information. I kind of look at listing in priority. When I'm reading from left to right, then I'm assuming that the first thing I read is going to be the most important thing you want me to know, right? So in this case, I'm assuming that this person wants me to contact them by calling them first because they put their phone number first. Then email. Then I might look at their LinkedIn profile. LinkedIn is still the number one way that employers may do what I call a soft background check. Even if you're in IT, a LinkedIn profile can be really, really important and good for you to use. I would also include your location, and that's what's missing here as well. So Pedro, you're correct. Even if it's for a remote job, I would still put your location just so they know where you're coming from. So thanks for that catch. That was a good catch, Pedro, for that. Then the next section, of course, your professional summary. This is your 30-second commercial. So if I were to ask, so Nathan, tell me about yourself. Well, who are you? What are you going to say? I want to hear about your professional self, but I want to hear it that's relevant to the job that you're applying to. So it's that 30-second commercial, also showing that you did your research, you read the job description, you may know something about the position from the company website. That's a great way to be able to get attention from recruiters. Then it gets into a little bit of gray area. So you can carry on and put your professional experience and then maybe your education and certifications, things like that. But if you're in IT, for example, what I would do next, and you will see this on our sample resumes on our resume page for career services. After the professional summary, I would put a technology profile. What operating systems do you use? Databases, software languages, maybe certain certifications that you get from CompTIA, AWS, Microsoft. That could also be done if you're in healthcare. And if you're a healthcare provider, say you're in, what I mean is if you're in nursing or if you're in even health administration, and they're looking for some clinical experience or background, you can put that information there too. You can have your professional summary and then maybe a clinical profile, and then you could include that. Any profession can have something like that. If you're an accountant, you're getting your degree in accounting or you're getting your degree in marketing and you have special features or skills you want to highlight, then you can have a section that covers that information. That helps an employer immensely. Super helpful. Get some great information across to them quickly. And that's just a really good tip to add to your own document. When you get to your professional experience or your work history, there's a way to present that to where it looks sharp, it's professional, and it provides the information that employers want to see. So the first thing you want to put is your job title. Then over to the far right of the page, you put your dates. The reason that you want to do that to the far right of the page goes back to one of the previous slides, that if an employer is skimming down the edge of the page, they're just looking at the dates to make sure there are no gaps. It's a lot easier to have that on the right edge of the page to just slide right down that edge and look at your dates. Then after your job title, maybe the second line is better to put where to put your employer name, the company name, city and state that's there. Yes, Sevan, we're going to talk about how to have your resume reviewed by our office. So I don't want that question to slip by, but we will talk about that in just a little bit. But thank you for raising that flag. We'll make sure that I address it. So after the employer name and the contact, the city and state of the employer, you could put a line that kind of describes your role in the company, what you did for the business, maybe some higher level responsibilities that you were involved with or in charge of. Then your bullet points can be reinforcements of that role, specific areas of accomplishments that you want to get across to the employer. You don't want to put everything you ever did, and you probably shouldn't, because again, it may be too long. And if we were to land on a number of bullet points, I'd probably say no more than 5 to 7. And also, I would not make them very wordy or long. I would keep them no more than 2 lines for each bullet point maximum. If you can say it well and complete enough within 1 line, that's all the better. So, so we'll stop here at this point as we're talking about professional experience. Another question came through. What about mixing companies where you have similar job titles or responsibilities, kind of summarizing your experience, your work experience? What you can do, I don't know if this makes any sense, but if it's a mix of companies, but you're doing the same jobs and kind of the same job title, then you can put maybe the job title that captures every company that you worked in, and then maybe the different company names with the dates to the right side, and then kind of your bullet points under that, if that makes sense. Let me see if I can. I don't know if y'all can see this. Here's our live um, lab part. Okay. So if I used to work as a server, okay? So I was a server at one time. Over here, I'm going to put my dates to the far right. And I worked at, let's say I worked at Bennigan's, Houston, Texas. Let's say I worked at Chili's, Dallas, Texas. And let's say I worked at another place. I can't think of anything. And I was in Arlington, Texas. These are all double spaced, but I don't mean them to be double spaced. And then if I put, what I did, all the different things, they're all very similar, but these are all going to be bullet pointed. So I want to make those bullet points. So you can have your companies listed and then the very similar things you did at each company. I hope that makes sense. All right. I'm going to get out of this guy here, go back to our presentation. That's there. Okay. Megan has a question. Is the opposite okay to list the same company repeatedly if you held very different job titles in the same company? No, I wouldn't. Because it's just repeated company, company, company. So Megan, I would list the company name, city and state, and then the full range of dates when you were at that company, regardless of what you did. Then under the company name, you can put the job title number one, and then the dates, job title number two, then the dates. If there were different roles with a couple of bullet points, that's okay. But it would be kind of the opposite of what I just explained. Company listed once, and then your different job roles underneath that. That's there's another question that what about showing how current job skills translate to a new job, such as when wanting to switch careers. So it's kind of another gray area. In one sense, you've got to list what you did based on that particular role that you were in. If you're switching careers, you could kind of that translation of the skills maybe more, I'm not sure how to, in the summary, if that could be explained a little bit. I did have one student this morning who was transitioning out of military service, and he worked in as a coordinator for a role, and he wanted to know something very similar. So I said, if you put something to the effect of coordinator as equivalent to project manager, I'm writing this out here. Project manager, let's see, skilled two, and then he kind of filled it out a little bit. So you're gonna have to be a wordsmith and kind of work that out a little bit. When there is that career change or that pivot to a new role, that's where it gets a little hairy and a little difficult to where how do I show those transferable skills? And then that's where we may have to do more individual reviews, so to speak, when you're ready for that time. But that's one thing that might be helpful. Okay. So again, with the bullet points, you want to try to keep them. I'd say I'd stretch it if I could. If you need to stretch it to 8 bullet points, that's fine. But after what we've seen in research and what we've seen in talking with employers, they're like, after 5 bullet points, if you can't convince me and get what you need to say within 5 to 7 bullet points, then bullet points 10, 11, 12, 13 is probably not going to do the job either. That sounds very straightforward, and it's like, wow, okay. But that's kind of the responses we're getting from employers. So I hope that helps. And like I said, not everything may fit that particular job. So if you've got 12 bullet points to include all the information, but really maybe only 5 out of those 12, then pick the strongest of those 5 to 7 bullet points and then drop the rest. If they still have some relevancy to the job, then just wait for the interview to say, I did more than what was listed on my resume, because they didn't want to overwhelm my resume. And so now I'd like to talk about what other roles I did or what other accomplishments I had, which I believe would add value to my position if I were chosen. Let's see, Megan. Can you clarify 5 bullet points per job title, not in total? Yes, correct. Yeah. So yeah, job number one, your most current job, if you have 5 to 7 bullet points for each individual job, that's there. Let's see. I copy from the job description. I would recommend not doing that. If I understand, if you're just copying and pasting the job description into your resume or sections of the job description directly cut and paste into the resume, I would not recommend that. It could be identified pretty easily. It's like, hey, he just cut and pasted this. Probably not a good strategy to have a good impression on the employer. You put it in your own words. And while we're on that, let's go ahead and it may come up later. But if you're using AI to build your resume, if you're using Chat GPT or something like that to build your resume or a cover letter, that's okay. That's not a deal breaker, but you want to then go into it and tweak it to make it your own work. So don't just leave it as is, because again, and I get this, and we're getting this from employers all the time. AI and Chat GPT are not foolproof. There are ways that things are written in terms that's not human. So it's okay to use as a tool, but you want to go in there and then make it your own unique document that comes from you, not just an online source. Hope that helps. Let's see. How would you communicate work experience if you were the company owner or entrepreneur? Um, Kind of the same way. I mean, you want to talk about, I mean, it depends on the job you're applying to. And unfortunately, time won't allow us to go into those kind of details at this point. But you want to, and I've had that. I've had that where students had, kind of a side company. They were the owner operator of that. But then their bullet points they used or their details were relevant to the jobs they were applying to. They didn't talk about, you want to make sure you're not looking overqualified. So again, it's, sure, you can use that because that's the job that you were in as an owner. But then using the job description to kind of maybe scale it down to where it fits the position. That makes sense. Well, turning back to our slide to finish up here, in your bullet points as we're carrying on that conversation, if you can quantify any accomplishments, that would be great. We give an example here. Increase qualified leads by 150%. Conversion rate 32% within 5 weeks. If you're in a role to where you can find that kind of data, that's great. If you're not, don't worry about it. That's not going to make a major, issue. But if you can quantify your accomplishments, that's a great way to use that. Otherwise, you want to make sure that your bullet points start with that action verb, the task you were in, and the result that's there. So I hope that helps a little bit. So, you don't want to just list responsibilities. You don't want to just list duties that you did. If there's a way that you can start with a kind of a stronger catchword or action verb, go into the tasks that you did, and then the result. The result could be, let's say if you're in IT and you were in desktop support, you could say, excellent ability to interact with customers with the ability to explain technical information, resulting in, return business, or resulting in, a satisfied customer, something to that effect. All right. Okay. And this is just, I needed to go to a second slide, but this will just be the conclusion of your resume. You have your education section. Only include the programs that you completed or that you're in progress of. If you're in progress, obviously going through WGU, getting your bachelor's degree or a master's, you do want to put that on your resume with the expected graduation date. That's there. Your degree title. You could include some courses if they allow you. If you're trying to keep your resume to one page, but if you add the courses that make your resume go into the second page, a few lines on the second page, then take the courses off. That's not as important as the course that you're in. So if, like this example, if the job you're applying to requires an MBA and you put Master of Business Administration MBA, most everybody knows what that basically is going to entail. You don't have to put your list of courses there. High school, of course, does not go on. Really, associate's degrees do not go on. Even if they're in the science field, for example. The reason is that it's just, most jobs today are going to be looking at your bachelor's degrees and master's degrees, but not really associates that's there. So just FYI, that's on that. Yes, if you're also in that section, you can put certifications. If you have a certification coming up to be completed within a reasonable amount of time, you can put in progress for that. Especially if they call for the certification as a plus on your resume, then you want to put that on there and then the completion date in progress. So good catch. Thanks for that. Now at the bottom, again, you want to kind of keep your dates or your dates of your work or your work history no more than 10 to 15 years max. So you want to stop at that 15-year mark that's there. All right. Now, I added this because it came up in one of the last sessions that I had that if you're making a really strong pivot from, let's say, talking about myself, okay? So if I were in the restaurant business as a server, but now I'm going into accounting and getting my accounting degree, my resume is not going to make sense if all I have on there is just all about being a waiter, right? So what I probably want to do is use a different type of resume, one that we call a skills-based resume or a functional resume. So I still have my name, my contact information at the top. I still have a professional summary that may be more of an aspirational summary. You know, aspiring accountant pursuing bachelor's degree in accounting, covering courses that highlight taxation, personal accounting, bookkeeping, you know, something to that effect. My education will then go at the top and not the bottom. Then I may put in 2, 3, or 4 major, what I call themes that would highlight specific skills that I've obtained either from my working as a waiter, working with money, working with mathematics, calculations, accuracy, working with a diverse population, to my schoolwork, covering GAAP principles, accounting fundamentals, you know, things of that sort. So, and then at the bottom is where I would just list my work history, not a detailed bullet pointed description. All right. Now, one question before we move on beyond that, another question about certifications. Certifications can go into their own section. So yes, you can put IT certifications and then put those in there. They don't have to go under your education section. I would put them if you're putting, you know, all of your higher end elements at the top of your resume, toward the top. That's where I would put it. So that's a good point. Okay, good question. So another question is with that, let's go back to that resume. The reason in this circumstance where you would put the education at the top is because there is no relevant work experience that will highlight your qualifications. So in this sense, you want to highlight your education, which would lean more toward your academic qualifications, especially if you're getting the degree that's being asked for from the job description. That makes sense. So now you're leveraging your education above your experience or your work because your work history is not going to be relevant to the new field that you're choosing. That makes sense with that. So Jalen, back to certifications. If you only have one certification, that's still fine. You could put ahead a title certifications, and then put that one certification with the certifying body and the date that it was obtained. So let's just say digital marketing certification, comma, American Marketing Association, comma, obtained 2023, something like that. Gives them good, well-rounded information. Now, some do's and don'ts that we mentioned earlier. Again, this is going to repeat some of the things based on your questions and based on our conversation. You want to make sure that your resume is not titled. You don't have to put a title on it. And I've seen that a few times. Software engineer. Go ahead and just obviously use your first name and your last name, but you don't need to title your resume because your first and last name is your title of the resume. Choose a classic font like Calibri, Arial, something like that. We call those sans serif fonts. And you can use Times New Roman. for example, that would be a serif font where it's got kind of a more detailed aspect. The reason for that classic sans serif font like Calibri or Arial, again, because it's a little easier on the eye. It's not a deal breaker if you choose a different font, but you want to use one that's going to make it across platforms. So if you're working on a Mac, for example, you want to use something that's also going to be used by a PC. So I hope that helps with that. If possible, limit your resume to one page. That's not all possible always. So that's okay. What you want to avoid is just having a few lines kind of bleed onto the second page. You want to avoid that because that's just a waste. And you don't need to do that. But if you got a page and a half, that's perfectly fine. Maintain consistency in your formatting. So what I mean by that is you want to make sure your dates are lined up all straight together. You want to make sure your bullet points are all lined up straight. They're not staggered on the page, things like that. Be intentional with the content. Again, you want to be intentional. Who's your audience? Who's going to be reading this? The company, of course. Customizing it to the job target, because like I said earlier, one size does not fit all. You could easily miss detail information if you're just using one resume to apply to multiple jobs. And always use that job posting or job description as your guide so that helps you tailor and target your resume for that. Now, things you want to avoid, you want to, Pedro, it just comes up. Avoid copying the entire description in white text or add it at the end of your resume. And I know that you were kidding when you mentioned that, trying to make the presentation fun. Do you mean this is not fun? Am I not being fun enough? Don't answer that. I actually had this happen at one time to where this is at another university I worked at, to where the student did take all the keywords that he thought were most important. He did kind of make them invisible at the bottom of his resume, but he misspelled some. And you know when you misspell a word on a Word document, you get that red squiggly line. So I saw these red squiggly lines just sort of hanging out there in space. And I thought, you know what I bet he did? So I highlighted the whole document, colored everything black, and sure enough, those keywords came up at the bottom of the resume. I took it as a teachable moment. So when he came in for a resume review, and I explained, what that, and he thought he was like, hey, it's going to make it through that ATS, and hey, what's the problem? I just need to get into that interview. But this is a deal breaker because he cheated and tried to make his way through without actually being transparent and honest on his resume. So I don't know what happened after that, but that was my moment to kind of mention to him. We'll see what happens after that point. So Jalen asks, so is Arial or Calibri best? I'm going to leave it up to you. There's no judgment on either one. The point is that when you're looking at this chat, look at the chat and see these are all sans serif fonts. So they're very clear, they're sharp, they're easy to read. That's kind of why you'll see a lot of street signs, not for every street, but for the majority. Street signs are written in a sans serif font so that it's easier to read them while you're driving, 30 miles, 35 miles down the street. If you live here in Dallas, you're driving like 50 miles down the street. So, but it's easy to read the street signs. So that's kind of the same philosophy behind that, I guess. I haven't seen this in a long time, but I thought it was worth putting in here. Don't put references upon request at the bottom of the resume. That really dropped off really a long time ago. So you want to avoid doing that. Personal pronouns I see pop up every once in a while. That's in your summary at the top where they'll say, I worked 40 hours a week. My best job was da, da, da. Well, it's not a narrative. It's not a grammatically correct like you're writing a paper or a news magazine article. This is a very different writing style that's unique to resumes, to where you don't need to use personal pronouns. Now, you can go, when we're talking about logistics and formatting, you can go down to 10-point size on your resume. It looks small. Sometimes that'd be fine, but we needed to fall on a number, especially if your resume is, like 2 pages or, 2.5 pages. Um, Try to avoid really using large fonts. You don't want to use 14, 16-point font throughout the entire document. So your headings, for example, here's what I go by. So your name could be 16-point. I can type headings like, work, experience, certifications, education. I usually say 11-point, and then bullet points can be, and text can be 10-point. That looks perfectly fine. Yes, this came up. Margins can be set to narrow, and that also maximizes your use on the page. So, plus when you have different size fonts, just those limitations that I put in the text, that adds another visual interest to your resume, whereas it looks a little sharper. Not everything is the very same size. All right, folks. So now we're switching to job descriptions and just a little bit on how to read a job description. Um, and it's not brain surgery, right? But the point is, at the top of the job description will describe maybe the company, and then it will describe kind of the role that they're looking for. This is what this role entails. Like this one, it talks about the company. Our culture is agile and open. Then it goes, as a distributor team member, we put a heavy emphasis on clear communication, collaboration, and iteration within the team throughout the company. It goes into talk about the team and what that team member would encounter. Okay. Then it goes into the skills and the requirements to be qualified for the job. Reading both the top and that middle section is going to be good for you to do, because you'll see that I highlighted in red what the most important parts of this job seem to be about. I bolded red certain words that keep coming up in the job description. They repeat it over and over again. So these are the things I want to make sure that's on my resume in some fashion. Because if they're looking for communications and collaboration, customer service, communication, collaboration, then my resume really needs to give examples and experience that I can fit this position. So that's a good way to use the job description to find that. Um, One other question from Pedro: would you focus more on requirements or responsibilities? I would use, well, you want to use a little bit of a mix. You can use like the requirements. Well, the responsibilities, you can help write your summary of qualifications at the top. That could be a good use of those responsibilities, that top part of the resume, to help write your summary. The skills and requirements can help with your bullet points, and help maybe if you're doing a separate, say, like I said, IT profile, or a separate profile, like business competencies would include customer service, communication, collaboration, customer life cycle, things like that. So yeah, I think that's a great question. Now, if you want to test out your resume and say, well, how can I put my resume through something like an ATS to see what happens? These are some of the ones that we found to be good to use. I would use, actually, at the very bottom, that jobscan.co. That's not a typo. It's just co at the end. That would be good to use, because the job scan can scan the resume and your job description, it will score your resume on how good it matches the job description that you included. But all these others can do the same thing. That tag crowd at the top, that's kind of a word cloud generator. We used to use those kind of back in the day. You put your resume into the tag crowd, and the words you use the most are the biggest that come up in your tag your word cloud and things like that. It's it might be fun to look at, see how it works. Now, one of you asked, where do you find, how do I submit my resume for a review? Right? So here's how you do it. You go to our career services homepage. At the top, you'll see career tools. Click on that. Then it will take you to another page where you want to click on under resource library, get the job. And then that's going to take you to where you will click on resumes. And that resume course on that next page will be what you will need to go through step 1 and follow those instructions. And that's kind of the path on getting to a resume review. All right, so we have another question about gaps. So I have a question about filling in experience date gaps with productive activities. Okay, so what I would do when you have a gap, and usually still today, if your career gap is a year or less, then that's probably not a big deal. If it's a couple of years or so, then it just needs to be kind of a placeholder. Sometimes folks will say, I left my job a couple of years ago. I've been staying home a little bit more, but I've been studying. I've been going through WGU to get my degree. Then in that instance, you can put pursuing bachelor's degree in business administration, Western Governors University, and then the dates, just like you would as a job, a job entry. It's a placeholder, so you don't. The only purpose is to say what activity was I doing during this time. If you are not pursuing your education, it kind of depends on what the circumstance was. I've had examples where people were traveling, they took some time off, kind of like a gap year. And that could be, international travels, encountering various cultures and diverse, people, in Italy, Spain, and France, and then the dates. Again, it's just a placeholder to let folks know what was going on during that time. Now, yes, if you were recovering from an injury, or taking care of, a parent or a family member, then it could be like convalescence, something to that effect. Fully recovered to work full time, I would include wording like that, so that you're trying to anticipate any kind of questions the employer may have. The employer says, I don't know, can Tanya work? Is she gonna, be off at recovery or physical therapy? But if you put in there fully recovered, qualified to work full time, something like that, that might be helpful. So yeah, good. Those are good points, because that's life, and that's reality, and that's what happens. And so it's helpful to let the employers know kind of what's going on. So you've all asked some really good questions. A lot of you have. If you have any other questions, we've got just a few minutes left. If there's something that you've been burning to ask or wanted to follow up with, we can certainly cover that now. Remember, if there is more that you want to discuss or cover, and you want to join us, if you joined us late today, we are having an all things resume discussion tomorrow. at 1:30 Central Time. All you need to do is go back to Handshake, find that, drop in. I'm putting it in the chat. Drop in all things resume. It's going to be 1:30 p.m. Central Time, and we'll keep talking. Okay. Yes. Excellent, Brianna. So most definitely, if you want to include academic projects that are more related to the field versus any, relevant work experience, then definitely you would want to include that in your resume. All right. Very good. Now, when we sign off today, believe that you will get a survey that will pop up or be given out to you. We appreciate your feedback. Any additional topics you want to cover or anything else you'd like to see us do as far as webinars, that'd be great. Just let us know. We'd love to hear from you on what you'd like to see in the future. Tanya, I'm not sure. You might want to clear your cache. If you're clicking on like the MBA template from our site, and it's not coming up, I'm going to go there now just to see what happens. If it's a broken link, it may certainly be something we have to check into. And that happens too. Technology is not bulletproof. Let me go to the get the job. I'm clicking on resumes. I click on step 4 is where you would see the templates. When I click on the MBA sample, it pulls up for me. And I don't know if that's just because I have maybe something special that's coming through. But you might clear your cache kind of later on, restart your browser and see if that works. All right. Sivan, I don't think you're not going to get the slide deck. We've talked about that. There's not a way that we can yet that we've done that, but you will get the full recording. So you'll get the recording if you need to fast forward to a particular section. That might be helpful. But we do have a talk into a way to send the slide deck because we send it through WebEx, and as of yet, I don't have those instructions for that, but we'll figure it out. Well, folks, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And great. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this and had some tips that you can use. I'm glad you all joined us today. Again, for those of you who may come in late, you will get a recording of this coming up. If it doesn't come through for me to send today, it certainly will be by tomorrow. So please hang in there. And again, thank you for joining, and I wish you all a great afternoon.